In this video, we're going to do some introduction to JavaScript in an HTML document. So let's just jump right in. So I've got a couple of things already working here. So I've got a folder structure. I've got a CSS folder, an images folder, a JS folder, and I've got my index.html. I've already created some files inside the CSS folder. I've created my style.css. Inside my JavaScript folder, I've got a script.js. This is going to be new that we're going to talk about this week. And then I've got the index.html. These are all just blank files, but I've just put them there just as a quick way to get started. I still have my images folder, although I don't think this week we're going to use any images because we're going to be playing around with JavaScript. So let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is just get our HTML page going. So I just use the single exclamation point in VS Code, and I get my my basic template. Let's go ahead and put that in. Then I want to go ahead and wire up the script or the styling. So I use the link for that. We've learned this in previous. This is also easy to find on the internet. For links, we use we're going to use href to point to our, and we can use the type ahead in VS Code. Okay, so now let's go ahead and load this into the browser. It's not gonna, we're gonna copy the path, flip over here to my browser. All right, so now it's loaded. Okay, there's nothing in it, just a blank page. Okay, so now let's go ahead and dig into our JavaScript a little bit. Now, what JavaScript is it's programming, cyclical programming. So I can write a series of statements and commands that will do things in the browser window. So I can do pop-ups in the window. I can move the HTML around. I can interact with the content that the user is typing in. And I can change the styling of the spreadsheet by doing those things. So let's just get a little bit of example of how you kind of wire them together. So I've created a JS folder, and inside that I've created a script.js. So .js is going to be the extension that's going to say this is going to be a JavaScript file. So VS Code is going to give me syntax checking for JavaScript. The most basic thing you can do in JavaScript is you can do an alert. So I'm just going to type this in, alert, hello world. Okay. So now when we're typing, this is a JavaScript statement. So alert is the name of the function I want to call. Okay, if we hover over it, we can get a little bit of description of how this works. I pass a parameter here, or pass an argument rather. Alert takes a couple of parameters. The functions receive parameters and we send arguments. So here I'm going to take an alert. I'm going to send it the argument hello world, and then I'm going to end the statement with a semicolon. And notice I have a literal string here value. So I put it inside double quotes. Single quotes works here too, but double quotes is my preference. And then I've included the argument in parentheses. So this is a single JavaScript statement. What this is going to do is it's just going to do a little pop-up on the screen that says hello world. So before I do that, I need to wire the script into my HTML. So I do that using the script tag. And here I'm going to use a source, not the href, but a source here. And then I'm going to say JavaScript, and I'm just going to use the type ahead. And the script tag does require an ending tag. So that is a container tag. So you do have to end that, even though we're leaving it empty, because we're including a separate script file instead of putting it directly into the HTML. Okay, so now let's see if it's wired up. So now if I did this right, what should happen is when I load the page, I should just get this pop-up that says hello world. So let's see if that works. I'm going to just reload that. There's my pop-up. This page says hello world. So this is just the built-in alert. There's one in every browser. You really don't get much control over how this looks. This is just the way it's going to be. So the browser kind of decides what the styling is and all that on this. So so here we have so now that we know everything's working, everything's wired up properly, we can just click OK, and we're back to our page. Now our JavaScript ran, it did the pop-up, and then it ended. Okay, so that's kind of how that works, right? But that's not particularly useful, right? I want to put elements on the page, and I want to interact with them. So before we do that, let's do a few other things that we can use. So in addition to doing the pop-up, the alert, You can also do, you can do a console.log. So if you do this, you can use this to kind of help if as you're writing more complex code. You can log things out to the console so that you'll be able to see what's happening as your code is executing. So now let's go back ahead and let's go ahead and go to the inspector panel. You see we have a tab here called console. If I click that, now when I load, I'm going to get the pop-up says hello world, and then get a message in the console that says this is a message in the console. So in my JavaScript code, I can do pop-ups on the screen. I can put out stuff on the console, messages to myself, or maybe if I'm trying to debug my logic, I can see what the state of my code is at any given time. So I can do that. The last thing you can do is you can do a prompt, and you can say, we're going to create a variable. So I'll explain this in just a minute, but this is a variable. That variable one equals prompt. Please enter something. Okay. So now if we do that, what's happening here is we're creating a variable. A variable is just a storage place. It's a way for me to reference a value from something, okay, from somewhere else in the page or in my code. So I just create a variable. Variables have data types. The default data type is a string. Okay, and so if you want to change it to some other type of variable, we'll use some methods and functions that we'll talk about in a few minutes to do that. But typically the variable types we're going to be dealing with, we're going to be dealing with strings. This is a string. It's a alphanumeric value. It's contained in quotes. You can't do math on it because it's a string. You can also have a numeric variable in JavaScript. You don't say what kind of variable it is. The runtime environment decides what kind of variable it is based on what value you put in it. So if you don't say what kind of value it is, then it's going to be a string. You can, if you parse it into an integer or into something else, then it will be another value. So for today, we're just going to have strings and numeric values. So we created a variable here, and the variable is on the right side of this expression. This is called an assignment expression. This is a command, right, that we're running. This is a command let, and then we're creating an assignment. We're defining a variable using the let keyword. This is the name of the variable. And then whatever's on the right side of the assignment, the single equals is an assignment operator. Then we're going to store that in variable one. So prompt is just going to pop up a little screen, kind of like the alert, only there's going to be a place for us to enter something. So when we do that, let's go ahead and run this and see what it does. So we run it. Here's our pop-up, hello world. There's our console message. Now here's our pop-up for the prompt. And I can just type something in here. Okay. And that's done. Now I created the variable, I stored data in it, but I didn't do anything with it. Okay. So even though I have this variable, I didn't do anything. I didn't do any other operations on it. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's say, first, let's just log it to the console. Okay, so now just like here in line 2 where I've logged a string to the console, I can just log the contents of my variable. Okay, so let's run that and see what it does. Here's my hello world pop-up. There's my first console log. And then there's another console. I could put that in alert. Let's go ahead and do another alert there. Now we're going to do something called concatenation. So I have this thing here, and I want to concatenate the contents of variable one. Concatenation is what is the term for when you take two strings and you mesh them and you combine them together into a single string. So in this case, I'm going to take the string literal, you entered colon space, and I'm going to concatenate that with whatever I entered in the prompt box. Okay, so this is concatenation, and it uses the plus sign, but the runtime operator is smart enough to know that since these are not numeric variables, then instead of doing addition, it's going to do concatenation. Now, if these were both numeric variables, then we would get a number back. So we would actually get addition. So let's go ahead and run that. Hello world. Here's the prompt. Okay. Oop, I got an error. Okay, so now in my console, notice I didn't get the alert. I got an error. It says uncaught reference error, variable is not defined. So what happened here is I made a typing mistake. And it says it's happening in my script.js line 6. So here I said concatenate with variable, but the name of my variable is actually variable 1. So by just using the word variable, that's undefined. So now I need to put a 1 on the end of it. Okay. Then I get the pop-up, the alert. Okay, and it's in the console. So now we can see that how those things are working. Let's go ahead and do a math one. Now this, even if I enter a value here, like a number in the prompt, like a 5 or a 10 or something like that, it's still going to be a string because the prompt function is only returning a string value. So if I wanted to convert that into a number, I would have to use a parse function, which we'll talk about in a minute. But let's do a quick math. So let's say let variable 2 equals 5 plus 10. Okay, so that's going to be 15 is the answer. And then let's go ahead and do console.log. Let's say variable 2. Okay. Now we should see another entry in the console. So let's go ahead and refresh that. Hello world. That's my initial alert. Here's prompt. Okay. And this says you entered, and then see I get now in my console 15. So that's the math that I ran. Okay. All right. So that's some really basics for JavaScript. Now this is all fine and dandy, right? But it doesn't really do anything, right? This is not how web pages work. So what we want to be able to do is create some content on our web page, and then we want to be able to use JavaScript to interact with it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just comment this out. Okay, because this is just, us exploring and getting used to the typing, but this is not really useful. So what I want to do is I want to, on my HTML page, I want to put a text box. Okay, and then in the text box, I want to have the user enter something, and then I want them to click a button. And when they click that button, I'm going to do some operations on that, on the value from the text box. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to, first of all, we need to put some elements on our HTML page. And then we're going to need to use JavaScript to interact with what's called the DOM. So the HTML page is called the document, and the document has structure. It has something called the document object model, or the DOM. And so using that, we can use JavaScript to reach into the DOM and extract elements and extract content from the elements that are on the page. And we can also use JavaScript to put elements back onto the page. So we can change the value of labels. We can change the value of paragraphs. We can retrieve the value of text boxes. We can react to events when somebody clicks a button, for example. So we can do all that using JavaScript and HTML. Okay, so here in HTML, first things first is let's create a div just to hold our stuff, and let's create an input box, and we'll give it a text. Okay, and we need to name them. So in this case, because we are going to be interacting them with JavaScript, we need to be able to reference them specifically. So I'm going to give it a single box. So I'm just going to call it box 1. Okay, and then here I'm going to create a button. Let's do a line break, and we'll put the button underneath it. So here I'm just going to create a button. This is another type of input. We used submit buttons and things like that when we did forms, but here we're just going to create a button. Okay, and the button is going to say, the button is a container form. Okay, so the button then has contents in it. So let's say multiply by 2. Okay, so we can do that. Let's also say a button here. Let's do a second button that says concatenate with itself. Okay, so we'll just double whatever they enter in. Okay. Okay. So and then what we'll do with that? Well, we'll just start by putting that on the console, and then we'll come back and we'll actually stick it in another element on the screen. Okay, so let's see if we type this in right. When we go back to the page, we can see we now have a text box and we now have two buttons. Now, when I click these buttons, it doesn't do anything, okay? When I click that button, what's happening is the browser is firing off an event. We call it, that's the lingo, as we say, an event gets fired, right, or triggered. And so when I click that, the browser fires the click event on this button, okay? Now, what I want to do with JavaScript is I want to put an event handler on that button. Now, there's a couple of ways to do that. The simplest way to do that is right here in the HTML. I just come into my button and I say on click equals, and then I put the name of a function. Okay. So now we need to name the function that we want to call. So mult by 2. Okay. Now I'm using the functions have a name, and the names are typically, I can't use the letter there. So mult by 2. Okay, so you shouldn't use a number. You can, but you shouldn't use a number in the function names. So my function name is named using lower camel case, which means it's got multiple words in it. So the word starts with mult. The phrase starts with mult. The second word is by. The third word is to. And so the first word is going to be lowercase, and then the following words are going to start with uppercase. So this is called lower camel case because it looks like a camel with the capital word with the capitals, but the first letter is lower. So lower camel case. So when I run this, it's gonna run the function mult by 2. Okay, so let's save that. I don't have a function named mult by 2 in my JavaScript, but let's see what happens when I run that. So if I refresh, what happens is I get an error in my console that says the mult by 2 method is not defined. Okay, so let's go ahead and define that function. So now to define a function in JavaScript, I go to my JavaScript file. I always define a function by using the keyword function. Okay, then I put the name of the function, mult by 2, and it has to match exactly. Then I put parentheses. If the function were going to be receiving parameters, I would put those here. So maybe I can send in data to the function, which we'll see in future courses. But for now, the parameter list is empty, but I have to have these parentheses here, otherwise it won't work. This is how I define a function. Then inside the function, I have the body of the function, and I define that by using the curly braces. So the curly braces is an open and a close. Notice the alignment of these is important for readability. Function, the name of the function, the parameter list, and then I have open curly brace on the same line as I define the function, and I have closed curly brace on a new line lined up with the beginning of the F in the function word. So this is always how I'm going to do my indentation. Next, when I come in to the method or to the function, I'm going to indent all of my code, and I'm going to let's just do a little quick test to make sure that we got the right place. So we just want to test to make sure we wired it up. Okay, so now if I save this, if I click that mult by 2 button, what should happen is I should get an alert that says clicked. So let's see if we did that right. Okay, and I did. All right, so now my function is wired to the button. Okay, so now what we actually want to do is put something in the we want to put something in the text box, and then in the method we want to retrieve, in the function rather, we want to retrieve the value of the text box, and then we want to multiply it by 2, and then we'll just alert it out. Or we'll put it on the console actually. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of that. That was just a test. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to retrieve the value of the text box. So here I have this text box. If I come in and I type 15, what happens now is I have an element. The element is called is the text box here, and we can see in our HTML that it is called box 1. So now when I type this in, whatever's typed in here, 15 now becomes a property of the element box 1, and the property is named value. So if I want to retrieve that, what I can do in my JavaScript is I say let variable 1 equal, and then I say where in the document I want to get it. So I want to reference the document. This is me manipulating and traversing the DOM, the document object model. I want to start with the document. The document is defined. It's the entire HTML page that we're operating on. And I want to say I want to get an element by ID. Now notice this is a function, right? So it's lower camel case, get element by ID. Now ID, you kind of want to make that second letter, that D uppercase, but it's not. It's one word. So you want to make sure that that's lower camel case like that. So and then we give it an argument which says which element do you want to get. So I'm going to say I want box 1. And then so now that I have that, so now this document.get element by ID is now giving me a reference to box 1. And so now I can manipulate that element, in this case, a text box. What I want to do is I want to retrieve the value. So I say, give me the value. Okay. Okay. So that is what we're doing. Okay. So now let's put a semicolon on that. Now, if this worked, then what we should be able to do is we should just be able to write it on the console. Console.log variable 1. Okay. Okay. So let's just do a little concatenation here. So we can say variable 1, we'll do a little message so that there's some context to what we're reading in the variable 1 equals, and then we'll concatenate it with the value variable. Okay, so this is concatenation. This is a literal value. We should say variable 1 equals 15 or whatever's in whatever's been entered into the text box. Okay, let's see if that works. Here we go, no errors. I refresh that, so there's no errors when we load the page. We can come in, we can click multiply. Now I didn't type anything in the text box. So when it says variable 1 equals, there's nothing here because I didn't type anything. So if I come in and type 15, okay, there we have it. So now by using that document.get element by ID.value, we can step through this. Document, start with the document where I'm referencing an element within the page. Within that document, find the element that has the ID of box 1. From that element, retrieve the value. Okay. All right. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. So now instead of just parroting it out to the console, I want to multiply it by 2. So let's say let answer equals variable 1 times 2. Okay. Now let's see what happens when I do that. It's not going to work because remember we typed in variable. It's a string value. So this is probably not going to work. So let's see what it does. If I come in here and I type 15, multiply by 2, you get variable equal 15. Oh, I forgot to log that to the console. So let's go ahead and log the second value to the console. And let's just say answer equals. Okay, save that, refresh this. 15, multiply by 2, and I get 30. Okay. Now I got lucky in this case because the JavaScript is pretty smart about assigning the type of variables here. So in this case, document.getElement by ID box 1 looks like a number. So JavaScript says, it kind of looks like a number, so I'm going to treat it like a number. Okay, it's then in the slang, it's called duck typing. If it looks like a duck, it must be a duck. So in this case, that looks like an integer. So an integer, a number, maybe it's, it has decimal points. That's a real number. So, but it looked like a number. So JavaScript created a number. You can also use a parse. So if you wanted to, there's a value here called parse int, where you could run a function that would actually take a string and parse it into a number if you needed to do that. But in this case, it's working. Okay. Let's go ahead and refresh that. 15 multiplied by 2 equals 30. If I say 12.5 multiplied by 2 is 25. Okay, that's right. What happens if I say ABC? Okay, I get something called NaN. That stands for is not a number. Okay, so in this case, what happens is variable 1 is ABC. JavaScript has decided that's a string. When I try to do multiplication on it, that's an error. JavaScript doesn't know how to multiply string values. Neither do I. So in this case, it just says not a number because it's an invalid mathematical calculation. Okay, so I can do concatenate with itself. Let's do that button. So what we want to do here is when we click that, we just want to take whatever's in ABC, and we're just going to concatenate it together. And then we are going to put it back. We're just going to print it out on the screen somewhere. I want to insert it back into the DOM. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and create another function. So let's call that function. Let's call it concatenate with me. Okay. So there's my function called concatenate with me. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, and then I'm going to insert it into my button here. So now when I click the on-click button here, on-click equals concatenate with me. Okay. Noticing when I'm doing the on-click, I'm using the name of the function, including the parameter list. So in this case, this is an argument list because I'm sending, not receiving. And so, but I'm using those empty parentheses because I'm defining it as a function. And I'm using the semicolon there. Okay, so we come back here, we do the script. Now when I run this, reload that, nothing happens, right? Because I haven't actually done anything with concatenate. So let's do the same thing. Let's go ahead and let variable one. I'm just going to copy this to save some typing. So now we have variable one. I'm retrieving the value from the box. And then let's just do the concatenation. So let's say let's answer equals variable one plus variable one. Okay. So now this is going to concatenate. It's might do math. If this is a number, it's going to do math. But before we get into that, let me talk about how I've used the same variable names in both functions. So variable one, answer, I've used the same variable names in both functions here. Now, they look like they're the same variable because they have the same name, but they're not because they're in different functions. That's called scope. So when I define a variable inside a function here, it is scoped solely to the function where it's defined. Okay. So in this case, this answer, even though it has the same name, variable name as the one down here in on line 20, it's a different method. I'm sorry, it's a different variable because it's defined in a different function. So even though it has the same name, the two are not related to each other at all. Okay, and then let's go ahead and put that on the console. Concatenated value is okay. So let's go ahead and run that and see what it does. If I do ABC, oops, I get console is not a function. So I'm typed something wrong. Okay, this is an error. I made an error on line 21 of my JavaScript. So I left out the log, console.log. Okay, let's try this again. Reload that. ABCD, concatenated ABCD, ABCD. But if I put a number here, I want to see 100, 100, but what I'm actually getting, oh, I'm getting that. Oh, there you go. Chrome is smarter than I thought. Okay, so in this case, because JavaScript is just figuring this out for me. Now you could, you can force these using parse values or using toString functions. You can force the data types, but in this case, we're getting lucky and Chrome is being really smart. Okay, so that is how we do the concatenation. Let me fix that spelling mistake. Okay, so now, but instead of just putting it on the console, let's actually create a label. Let's put a label on the page, and then let's put our answer in the label. Okay, so right here, I'm just going to, underneath this, I'm just going to say, I'm just going to put a label right here, and then when I click the button, instead of putting it on the console, I'm going to stick the value in that label so it will show up on the HTML document itself. So what I need to do is I need to go back to my HTML, and I need to create a element where I can put that data. So I'm going to create label, and I'm going to give it a name of answer. Okay. Now, when I load, my label is empty. Okay. So when I load the page, the label will be empty. You won't be able to see it. But I'm going to use the JavaScript to actually change the contents of this. So let's see how that works. So when I come here to concatenate with me, so we could put it on the log here. But what we want to do is we want to assign something to the label. So Up here, we used an assignment function. So I defined a variable on the left. I use the assignment operator equal, and then on the right side of the assignment, I said I want to call this function, and the value of that I want to put into my variable. So I just want to reverse that. Okay, I want to say document dot get element by ID. The ID is called answer. Now I want to put something into it. Now for the text box, value is the contents of the text box, but for the label, the contents of the label is the inner HTML. So now see we have this container label. See it has the label, the start of the element, and then the slash label is the end of the element. This space in here is called inner HTML. Okay, that's what that space is called. Okay, and so that's the property of this element. So if I want to change it, I just say change the inner HTML, okay, equals and then I say, what do I want it to equal? So I'm going to say, I'm just going to use the same thing I put in the log. Concatenated value is, and then concatenate the answer. So now what should happen is I should get the same thing on the console as I get in my new label. All right, let's see if it works. Refresh that, ABCD, concatenate. There it is. Okay. All right. Pretty cool. Okay, so now let's do the same thing for multiply. Instead of just putting it on the console, let's go ahead and put that on in the element as well. So I'm going to come up here, document.get element inner HTML equals, and let's just get a little fancier. Let's just say variable 1 concatenate times 2 equals concatenate answer. Okay, so now we should get a message there. Let's see what happens when we do that. Refresh the page. 15 times 2 equals 30. 150. 150 times 2 equals 30. ABCD is not a number because you can't multiply a string. Okay. See how that's working? All right. Pretty good. Okay, so now this is great. So now we've got some JavaScript, we've got an interactive page. So this is called client-side interactivity. So we've written some JavaScript and we've allowed the user to interact with the elements, and we're changing the state of our page by interacting with that. Okay, I'm going to finish by doing a quick little style up of this. I'm not going to put any images here, but I am going to style it up a little bit just to practice my CSS a little bit. So what I want to do is I'm going to center all this on the page. I want to move it all over here. I want to put a little space between it. Excuse me. I want to make the fonts bigger. I want to put a little padding inside this box, inside the text box. I want to make these buttons, so I'm going to turn them color and kind of pretty them up a little bit. Make them the same size. Okay, so let's do this one step at a time. So the first thing first, let's just let's center everything. And then add some padding to the text box. So let's come over here to our style. Style's already been wired in to the HTML page. So let's come to style. Let's just say here on the body, let's make the width 60% of the screen, and let's make the margin auto. That's going to just put it in the middle of the page. Excuse me. Refresh that. Okay. Whoops, did something wrong there. What did I do wrong? I got rid of the margin at the top. Okay. I also want to center this. So it's centered on the body is 60%, but I didn't center the contents. So I want to do text align center. Okay, there we go. Okay, all right. Kind of the margin's gotten really skinny there. So at the top. So let's go ahead and add for HTML page, let's go ahead and add an H2 an H1 right there, rather at the top, that just says, this is JavaScript testing. Okay, do that, just spread it out a little bit. Now we see that there's no space, there's no margin in between the text box and the buttons here. That's because I set the margin to auto, which means it's gonna center. But what I can do is I can set the top and bottom margin of the text box. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and so for the input, we'll just put some margin on the top. So let's style up the input button. We'll put some margin at the top to kind of, or at the bottom to kind of spread it out, because it's right up against these buttons. Okay, so let's style up the input. So my CSS selector is going to be input. I can use input here. I could also use, alternatively, I could use the ID selector, box 1. Okay, I could use that as well. It doesn't really matter here. If I have multiple inputs, I'm probably going to want to style them all the same. So I'm just going to use input here. So for all the inputs, what I want is I want to make the box bigger. I want to make the font bigger. Okay, so let's start with font size. Let's go ahead and make it 18 pixels. All right, let's just ramp it up. The other thing I want to do is I want to make the box itself bigger so that there's some space in the box between the contents of the box and the border of the box. So we see here the box got a little bigger because I gave it an 18 pixels, but we see that there's no space. The contents of the box is really close to the border. So what I want to do is I want to put padding inside the input, which what that's going to do is it's going to put some white space around the content of the padding. And I'm just going to use the single nomenclature here, and it's going to, if I just do 20 pixels, then it's going to put 20 pixels of padding all around the box, inside the border, between the border and the contents of the box. And it's going to be top, bottom, right, left. So it's going to be pretty beefy, right? That's probably too much, okay? So let's go ahead and inspect that. We can just play around with it and say styles, padding. So I'll just highlight that. I'm just pressing the down arrow key here and say, maybe 10 is enough. 10 should be enough, okay? So let's just do padding of 10. And then let's put some margin on the bottom, margin dash bottom, just so that we have some space between the buttons and the box. Let's put 20 pixels in there. Okay, there's really no science to this. It's really just kind of play around with it, see what's right. Okay, so now we've spaced it out a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now let's style the buttons. So for the buttons here, let's go ahead and let's increase the font size. Let's make them the same width. Okay, let's put a little padding so there's some space in between the border. Let's make it a little round. Maybe it's instead of a square button, let's make it a little pill-shaped. Okay, so we can do that by styling the button. So we're going to do the same thing. Font size, 18 pixels. Let's go ahead and make the background color. I'm not going to go to color hex. I'm just going to pick one of the built-in ones. Let's do navy, kind of a dark color. Okay, and then let's see how that looks. Okay, all right. I need to change the color of the text, so I do that using color, and let's just make it white. Save it, reload. There's my white. Okay, let's make them beefy. So let's put the same. Let's make them a little bigger. Put some padding in between the label of the button and the border. So we did 10 pixels of padding on the text box. Let's just do the same thing. Padding 10 pixels. Okay, and then let's make them the same width. Okay, so this one is concatenate with itself. We can come into the inspector. We right click on that. We click inspect, and we see in the DOM, here's where we are loaded. And then we can scroll over here to computed, and we can see the current width of that is 205 pixels. So if we just make both of these elements like 215 pixels, then they'll be the same size. Okay, so we can say min width equals 215 pixels. Okay, so now they're the same size. Labels centered by default. And And then the last thing we want to do is maybe put a little gap in between them. Okay, so we've got margin. Let's just do a little margin all around of like 10 pixels. So those will be margin on all four sides. Okay, separate them out a little bit. Okay. So now if we multiply by 2, now we've got style or label. Okay, so let's just do the label the same way as we did the input with the font and the and for here, let's go ahead and use the ID selector. So for the label called answer, I want to make the font size 18 pixels. Let's go ahead and make it bold. Font weight bold, and let's go ahead and let's make it. Let's see, font family. Let's pick a different font just to fool around. Let's make it Curry, the Courier font. Okay. So so now when we run this, I can come in. I type 500 multiply by 2, and notice I get a different font here. Okay, it looks a little different. The default is probably something called sans serif. I'm not sure what the default is. Let's see. Does it say if we can inspect that? We can come down to compute it, and we can say the font family is Arial. So on my computer, Arial is the default font there. Okay. Okay. All right. So that's the contents. Okay. So notice something else that's happening here. I'm getting an error here because I've used the label outside of the label. Really needs to be in the container of some kind, apparently. So it says it's not in the form. Yeah, I've just used that I've used that element incorrectly according to the rules of HTML, but it still works. Okay, so but notice when I'm inspecting the value, label here is empty. There's nothing, there's no content. There's no inner HTML in label. So when I come here and I type something, notice how my label down here changes. So now we can see that the DOM is changing. So the current HTML that I'm viewing in my browser is different from the one that I loaded. That's why when I refresh the page, it goes back to my load value. So as I'm working with this and manipulating this DOM, the contents of my form of my document is changing. So now I lose that value unless I send that data back to a server somewhere on the internet. Then that all of this data is gone when the page is unloaded. Okay, but we're not going to get into that. So that's outside the scope of this class. Okay, so I think that's it. So we've created a little simple page. We've done some interaction on it by using some JavaScript. We are retrieving values from elements on the page using document.getElementById. We are logging to the console. We did a pop-up with an alert. We are changing values of elements on the page using the getElementById and the inner HTML values, and just kind of getting some good comfort with some basic JavaScript. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. There'll be an assignment in Canvas for you to work on.